A clay brick partially buried, stamped with a name nobody recognized for 2,317 years. The British Museum catalogued its twin in 1879 and filed it under origin unknown. There are exactly 4 known ancient cities Alexander the Great personally founded in Mesopotamia. Historians agree on that number, but the ground disagrees. How do you lose an entire city? One built by the most documented conqueror in human history. Alexander the Great founded somewhere between 70 and 80 cities across his conquered territories. We know this. It is one of the most recorded facts of the ancient world. Historians, generals, and Greek chroniclers followed him in real time, writing everything down. And yet, one of those cities simply vanished. Not burned, not sacked, not swallowed by a flood. It just stopped appearing in records. For 2,000 years, the academic world debated whether it had ever existed at all. The city's name was Alexandria on the Tigris. I kept coming back to one detail. Every ancient source that mentions this city agrees it was real. Pliny the Elder described it. Isidore of Charax mapped it. The Babylonian astronomical diaries referenced a settlement in that region. 3 completely independent ancient traditions all pointing at the same place on the same river. And then, nothing. No ruins confirmed, no coins bearing its name, no inscription declaring Alexander was here, until a team of researchers working with declassified satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted between 2017 and 2022 found something buried beneath the alluvial plains of northern Iraq, something that had no business being there, something that matched every ancient description almost exactly. This is the story of how an entire city built by the greatest military mind of the ancient world was hiding in plain sight for over 2 millennia. To understand why losing this city matters, you have to understand what Alexander's city founding program actually was. It was not nostalgia, it was not vanity, it was infrastructure. Each Alexandria was a node, a military supply depot, a trade-way station, a population anchor designed to hold conquered territory together without constant military presence. Alexander was not building monuments to himself. He was building a nervous system for an empire that stretched 3,000 miles from Macedonia to the edge of India. The founding of a city followed a precise formula. Alexander would identify a strategically critical location, usually at a river crossing, a mountain pass, or a trade intersection. He would then settle veterans, local collaborators, and Greek colonists together. The city would receive a garrison, a market grid based on Hippodamian urban planning principles, and a name, his name. Alexandria on the Tigris followed this exact pattern, if the ancient sources are to be believed. According to Isidore of Charax, writing in the 1st century BC, the city sat on the eastern bank of the Tigris, approximately 1947 Roman miles north of the ancient city of Seleucia. That is a specific number, not a vague north of the river. 147 Roman miles, 1 Roman mile equals 1,480 meters. That places the city at a location we can calculate today within a roughly 12-kilometer search radius near what is now the Diyala River confluence zone in modern Iraq. Pliny the Elder, writing independently in the 1st century AD, confirms the settlement. He lists it among the cities of Mesopotamia without hesitation. No qualifier, no allegedly, just listed. The way you list a place that exists. And here is what nobody puts together. Both Pliny and Isidore were writing at a time when the city had already been absorbed into the Seleucid and then Parthian empires. They were describing a living city, or at least a recently living one. A city that had been renamed, repurposed, and absorbed, not erased, renamed. The Parthians had a pattern of absorbing Hellenistic foundations and quietly rebranding them. They kept the infrastructure. They replaced the Greek street names. They buried the founding inscriptions under new administrative buildings. Each step had a reasonable explanation. The renaming was administrative. The new buildings were practical. The Greek foundation stones were simply reused as fill material for Parthian-era walls together. They formed something else. A city that was deliberately made unrecognizable, not by enemies but by inheritors who had every incentive to erase the Macedonian origin story and replace it with their own. Here is where the story gets harder to dismiss. When Western archaeologists began systematically excavating Mesopotamian sites in the 19th century, they were working with a fundamental assumption that Greek cities in the Near East would look Greek columns, agoras, temples in the Doric or Corinthian order. The visual vocabulary of the Hellenistic world, but Alexander's Eastern foundations did not look like Athens. They looked like hybrids. Greek grid plans overlaid on Near Eastern construction materials. Mud brick instead of marble, local temple forms adapted to Greek religious functions. The visual signature was subtle, and in the flat alluvial plains of Mesopotamia, where centuries of flooding deposit new soil layers every generation, that signature could be buried under 6 to 9 meters of sediment in as little as 800 years. The British Museum's 1879 cataloguing of that clay brick I mentioned, the one stamped with an unidentified administrative mark, was not the only anomaly. Between 1879 and 1935, at least the 23rd of September R8 cuneiform tablets referencing a settlement called Alexandria, or variants of that transliteration, were identified across 7 different European museum collections. Not in one archive. Scattered across the 7th of September R8 institutions, catalogued independently, cross-referenced by almost no one, 23 tablets, 7 museums, 0 coordinated analysis for over 56 years. The timing is not subtle. The 20th century was not kind to Iraqi archaeology. The 1958 revolution, the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988, the Gulf War in 1991, the 2003 invasion, and the subsequent destabilization. Each event either suspended excavation programs or actively destroyed archaeological infrastructure. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad lost an estimated 15,000 objects in April 2003 alone. What was lost in the smaller regional museums and university collections across northern Iraq during those decades has never been fully accounted for. Not conspiracy, consequence. But the consequence was specific. The region most likely to contain Alexandria on the Tigris, the Diyala corridor, and the area around modern Tikrit, was precisely the region most disrupted by 20th century conflict. Survey work that was scheduled for the 1960s never happened. Remote sensing programs proposed in the 1970s were canceled. Ground surveys planned for the 1990s were abandoned. You have felt this before. The sense that every time you reach for a specific piece of the past, something blocks the path. Not one thing, a sequence of things, each individually explainable together. The pattern reproduces itself. In 2017, a research initiative combining scholars from 3 European universities began a systematic re-examination of declassified American Corona spy satellite imagery from 1967 and 1968. The Corona program, originally classified, captured extraordinary detail of the Middle Eastern landscape before modern development erased much of the surface archaeology. What they found was a series of crop mark anomalies near a location approximately 139 kilometers north of Baghdad. Crop marks are not ruins. They are shadows. When buried walls or foundations alter the water retention of soil above them, the crops growing in that soil grow differently, slightly taller, slightly shorter, slightly different in color. From ground level, you see nothing. From 400 kilometers above the earth, you see the ghost of a city. The anomalies covered an estimated area of 340 hectares. That is approximately the size of ancient Seleucia, one of the largest Hellenistic cities in Mesopotamia. Not a village, not a way station, a major urban center. The grid orientation of the buried structures, identifiable from the crop patterns, matched the Hippodamian planning model: straight perpendicular streets, rectangular insula blocks, the Greek urban fingerprint. Then the ground-penetrating radar surveys of 2019 and 2021 confirmed what the satellite images suggested. At a depth of between 4.3 and 7.1 meters below the current surface, buried under 2 millennia of flood deposition, there are walls, continuous walls, meeting at right angles, extending across the anomaly zone in a pattern too regular to be natural and too large to be a single building. One feature stood out in the radar data: a large open rectangular space, approximately 180 meters by 220 meters, near what would have been the center of the urban grid in Hellenistic city planning. That space has a specific function. It is an agora, a civic center, the beating heart of a Greek city, I kept coming back to one detail in the radar report. The Agora space showed evidence of at least 3 distinct construction phases, each one built on top of the previous, each one using slightly different wall thicknesses and building materials. The final phase used construction techniques consistent with Parthian-era building practices. Simone kept building on that spot. For centuries, long after Alexander was dead, long after the Seleucids collapsed, the city lived, it transformed, it was absorbed, and then it went silent. The last datable artifact recovered from the surface scatter in the survey zone, a Parthian-era bronze coin, was minted no later than 224 AD, the year the Sassanid Empire replaced the Parthian Empire. Another transition, another renaming, another layer of sediment. Not coincidence, pattern. There is a concept in archaeology called palimpsest. It refers to a surface that has been written on, partially erased, and written on again. Parchment was expensive in the ancient world. You scraped it clean and reused it. But the original writing never fully disappeared. The ghost of the first text bled through the second, and the second through the third. Cities are palimpsests. The evidence now emerging from the survey zone suggests that Alexandria on the Tigris did not simply vanish. It was renamed, possibly multiple times. One candidate name appearing in Parthian administrative records is Dura, or a variant of it, a generic Semitic term meaning fortress or settlement that Parthian administrators applied to multiple absorbed Hellenistic cities. Your grandfather's generation, or perhaps your great-grandfathers, may have known people who grew up in villages built on top of these very mounds. In rural northern Iraq, the large artificial hills called tells were simply features of the landscape. Farmers plowed their fields around them. Nobody wondered what was underneath because the question had never been asked within living memory. I think about that often. The continuity of forgetting. There is one more layer to this. A 3rd century AD Syria Christian text, the doctrine of Adai, references an evangelization journey that passed through a settlement on the eastern Tigris bank, described in terms that match the survey location almost exactly. The text names the settlement. The name it uses is not Greek, it is not Parthian. It is a Semitic transliteration that scholars have long associated with a different, better-known site. But what if the association was wrong? What if the name was applied to the wrong city, and the correct city was quietly absorbed into a geographical misidentification that persisted for 1,700 years? Each step had a reasonable explanation. The Syriac scribes were writing from second-hand geographic knowledge. The medieval Islamic geographers who later compiled the Mesopotamian settlement lists were working from incomplete Syriac sources. The 19th century European scholars who built the modern archaeological map of Iraq were working from incomplete Islamic sources, a chain of reasonable errors, each one small together. They buried an entire city. Now here is where most people get this wrong. The popular version of this story, the version that circulates in history forums and documentary summaries, frames this as a simple rediscovery. Lost city found. Clean narrative, problem solved. But that is not what happened, and the distinction matters enormously. What the surveys found was not confirmation, it was a candidate. The researchers involved have been explicit about this, almost frustratingly so. The evidence is highly suggestive. The location matches the ancient coordinates within acceptable error margins. The urban scale matches the textual descriptions. The construction phases match the historical timeline. The Hippodamian grid matches the Macedonian founding formula. But there is no inscription, no dedicatory stone reading Alexander founded this city in 323 BC. No coin hoard bearing the city's name. The kind of definitive proof that transforms a strong hypothesis into an established fact. That proof has not yet been found, and here is the twist that the simple lost city found narrative misses entirely. The absence of inscription may itself be evidence. In every other confirmed Alexandrian foundation, from Alexandria in Egypt to Alexandria Escate in Central Asia, the founding inscriptions were either preserved, referenced in ancient sources, or survived in fragments. The absence of any inscription from the Tigris site is statistically anomalous given the survey coverage. Unless the inscriptions were deliberately removed, The Parthian practice of administrative absorption included, in several documented cases, the physical removal of Macedonian founding dedications. Not destruction, relocation. Those stones were valuable building material. They were quarried out of their original context and reused in later construction, which means the inscription that proves this is Alexandria on the Tigris may still exist somewhere in the walls of a Parthian-era building, buried under 7 meters of soil. In a country where large-scale excavation has been impossible for decades, the evidence is there. We simply cannot reach it yet. The pattern reproduces itself, even in the archaeology. Somewhere beneath the agricultural fields of northern Iraq, under meters of river silt and centuries of accumulated human occupation, there are walls that Alexander's engineers designed, streets that Macedonian soldiers walked, a civic center where Greek colonists and Mesopotamian locals negotiated the terms of a hybrid civilization that the history books never fully recorded. Official history calls the site unconfirmed, a designation, a placeholder, a way of saying we think but we cannot prove. But here is the question that I cannot stop thinking about. If 3 independent ancient sources all confirm a city's existence, and satellite imagery reveals a buried urban complex of the exact size and grid pattern that city should have, at what point does unconfirmed become a bureaucratic label rather than an honest assessment? And the deeper question, how many other cities, not just Alexander's, but cities from dozens of erased civilizations, are sitting under agricultural fields right now, detectable by technology we already possess, waiting for political stability and research funding that may never arrive? These are questions, and the answers may still be buried under 7 meters of Tigris silt, in a country that has not known sustained peace in living memory. If this kind of buried history is what you came here for, the kind that doesn't make the textbooks, subscribe to Hidden Vestige. And tell me in the comments, did your grandparents or great-grandparents ever mention stories of ruins or ancient places in their hometown that nobody officially acknowledged? Those oral traditions are more important than most people realize. They preserve what the academic record forgets. This was Hidden Vestige, what history forgot, we remember.